Hey guys, it is Historian321 coming back at you with one more video. It's so sad, I know. But you guys will walk out of whatever room you're sitting in watching this video with a brain full of knowledge on how all these events added up to the decline of feudalism. So I like to think of this as a math equation. So like it was like the Magna Carta plus the Crusades plus the Black Death plus the revival of trade in towns plus the 100 Years' War all added up and equaled the decline of feudalism for many reasons. So if you noticed how I did my results at the end of every video this past week, you would notice that the peasants always had a positive outcome, and they were the only social class that did. And because of them, the decline of feudalism started to happen, because originally, when they had feudalism, they were kind of the ones that caused it. They were the ones that farmed, and they were the ones that started the whole return thing. Farm for protection, farm for food, all that stuff. But now they were benefiting from this. They had more freedom. They could leave and all that stuff. So in the Magna Carta, the peasants, they now had fair trials and fair taxes, unlike they did before during regular feudalism, when they didn't have fair taxes and fair trials. So if you think about that, not only did they have fair trials, but this was kind of taking away power from the monarchs, because usually the monarchs would be illegally telling the judges to do the case in their own favor, like Henry II. That's all I remember, but also King John did. King John abused his power. And now that the Magna Carta the document was signed, the nobles now had more freedom. The kings still had the most power, but they couldn't abuse it like they were originally, which was a good thing into the kind of feudalism, because now, instead of them just ruling all the social classes below, everyone had a little freedom here and there. So here's the feudal pyramid. It's crumbling at the top now. It's caving in. So during the Crusades, the peasants and serfs got to get out of their manor, and if they didn't get out of their manor, the decline of feudalism might have not happened, because the Crusaders would travel through the Holy Land, and they'd experience cultural diffusion, and they'd learn about other cultures, and then they'd go back home and teach it to their families. Now, since they got to get out of their manors and see new cultures and gain skill and get goods and stuff, this was taking away from feudalism, because now they didn't have to farm anymore. They were like, oh, I can shine shoes. I'm gonna go shine shoes in that city. So they were leaving now. They were like, yeah, trade is back. I don't have to stay in this farm anymore. I just learned a lot out in the Crusades in the Holy Land. I'm gonna leave, go to a city with my family and start a new, better life. So also the crossbow was invented in the Crusades, and because of the crossbow, knights, the value of one knight wasn't as much anymore, because you could just get any average guy and just have him shoot a crossbow. So the kings did not have to rely on the nobles anymore, like they did before in feudalism. With the whole feudal pyramid, they were relying on them to do a bunch of other stuff, but they were also relying on them to supply them with knights. So as a result of the Crusades was the Rotgott, revival of trade, and the growth of towns. So like I already said, there was gaining opportunity for all the peasants and serfs. They could now leave. It was legal. They could leave because they had skills now. They had skills. They could trade and stuff. So they were leaving for cities. They were having better lives. And now that they were leaving, nobles didn't have as much workers anymore like they did in feudalism. In feudalism, what they had a bunch of workers. The peasants and serfs couldn't leave. So the nobles had workers for them, and that's how the whole feudal pyramid would work. It would be an exchange system, and people would farm in return for protection from the nobles. But now this didn't really matter anymore. So after the Black Death, one third of the population, not one half, 1/3 of the population in Europe died. So this was like nobles too. They were dying too. So now the peasants had less control over them. So they had more freedom and more opportunity. And since there were less people because of the Black Death killing everyone, the monarchs had less people to tax. So they didn't have as much money, they didn't have as much power, they weren't rich anymore. They were just kind of they were starting to feel how it feels to not be always getting what they want and being all kingy and monarchy. So I think you can see a pattern developing now. There was more power for the peasants. It wasn't necessarily power, it was more freedom and rights. And now that they had more freedom and rights, they were kind of they were kind of like, here are the nobles and here are the peasants and knights. They were kind of like rising up and being like average people, like a class was forming. And after the revival of trade in towns, there was something called the middle class forming. And the middle class was only formed because of trade and skill, and these people had actual money. They weren't just regular farmers that just made the same amount of money. The middle class was now forming because people had more freedom and because people had more power, peasants, there was like average people now that didn't compete. They didn't have like the exchange system. They just lived, they had work, and they just did it, made money, and that's how life worked now. It was no feudal anymore. There was no feudalism. There was, but it was starting to die down. So during the 100 Years' War, a bunch of towns were abandoned. So yes, peasants and serfs were allowed to leave their manor again, but that was not the only good thing. If they survived, they could go to those abandoned towns and make new money. They could use their skill, live in those abandoned towns, and restart a whole new life after the war. Another positive thing for the peasants. This just keeps going on, man. So now professional armies were starting to come into effect. People were hiring professional armies instead of just average guys that could fight. And the longbow was invented. So just like the crossbow, the longbow is even an improved version of the crossbow, so the value of one knight decreased once again. And it didn't even matter if you had knights anymore, because they had professional armies and the monarchs would just hire them. And because of this, it was like a domino effect. Since the monarchs were hiring the pro armies and stuff, the nobles weren't relied on as much anymore. They didn't have as much like power because they didn't need to supply the monarchs with knights anymore. Monarchs were just like, yeah, I don't care about your knights. I'm going to hire that pro army over there. So now that nobles were starting to like decrease, they weren't as like important anymore. You can kind of see like average people forming. The knights weren't as important. They're kind of up here. Now the nobles are coming down. Now the peasants are coming up. They're all kind of just forming. It's a great thing because now it was just the monarch and then the regular people. Everyone, there was no like social class. There wasn't like rankings anymore. Everyone was more like together. Everyone had their own thing that they were doing. They would work. It was just a better life. So the loyalty was shifting from the knights and the nobles and the monarchs to basically just the monarchs, because now the nobles weren't as important. No one really cared about them anymore. They didn't have a lot of purpose anymore. The knights, like, screw the knights, because now they had professional armies. So they were all kind of like, okay, I don't care about you. Let's look at the monarchs now. They're the people protecting our country, and they are supplying us with everything. Just like how it is today, we look at the president, because he is our guy. So by now, without like social classes anymore, without farming, people had trade, people had working and stuff, they had towns, now they didn't have manors and fiefs and stuff. You could kind of see that feudalism was not there anymore. The decline of feudalism, like we were talking about this whole week. So picture it like this. Here's feudalism at the beginning. Everyone was like, yes, this is working, because they didn't have a central government, they didn't have trade anymore. But then trade started to come back, central government started to come back, they were all looking to the monarchs. It's like, bam. Bye, feudalism. Alright, hope you guys enjoyed. This is my last video of the week, and I hope you guys learned a lot about the decline of feudalism. I will not be back for another video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe one last time, and happy birthday, Mr. P. One last time. This is it. This is Historian 321. Out.